All right, boys, it's been a minute since I've done a Bleacher Report article. Shout out to Dan. They have going all in on the Rudy Gobert experiment. Yeah, I remember when that trade went down, man, it was like a shock through the NBA internet of like, wait a minute, how many picks did they give up and all that? And look, to be fair, I thought they were going to be better than they've been so far. Cat has been out recently, at least in their last game against the Blazers. Their fourth quarter was pretty alright with like Gobert helping off of Jabari Walker. He was able to block Dame and Shaden Sharp on two different plays. One where they trapped Dame and then Gobert was able to contest that Nurkic, so that was nice. And then they had the Pistons game where the Pistons were switching basically everything against them and their offense just went to complete iso ball and Gobert was just kind of a second thought for him. It's just a weird team right now, man. I think there's something to say about like a free-flowing offense that they try to have versus more of a set plays offense, and how much of Anthony Edwards being the lead ball handler do they want to dabble into more. But also the defensive chemistry where like Rudy's dropping back on screens and then guys are like, well, how much help do I provide? And they're just in a weird spot. You know, a lot of people would say that D'Lo is the guy who's got to go for the sake of getting a guard who might not be as talented but keeps the ball moving and doesn't shoot the ball as much. Even then, that feels awkward because there's those games where D'Lo drops 30 on good efficiency. I would prefer not to pin this on one guy. I think it's just an awkward thing all around right now. So we'll see what happens between Chris Finch, trades with the roster. To reiterate what I think the vision was, it was basically, look, Gobert protects the rim. When Towns is involved in actions, he can play high up because he was doing that last year when he was involved in like pick and rolls and stuff. Although there's also been some transition defense problems, especially when those guys were there together. And on offense, we got spacing around Rudy. Towns can still post up. Rudy's not going to hurt the spacing there. Again, Towns has been out for a minute, so okay. But I think they were also hoping for like D'Lo and Edwards to just have great chemistry with Gobert around screens. And sure, you can find times where D'Lo's hitting him with a bounce pass or whatever, but there's also the times where the timing isn't totally off, or like maybe he had the window for it, but they didn't really throw it to him in time, or they do throw it to him and he doesn't catch it, or just it's too many bodies running in one direction towards the rim. And now we go through the rest of the league. Atlanta, is this going to be a Kevin Huerter trade? Kevin Huerter to Sacktown, letting Travis Schlenk direct your entire offseason before pivoting into different front office. Yeah, that was a weird thing that just like kind of came up out of nowhere. Yeah, I mean, some of it is that Bogdan was hurt for a decent chunk of this season. And I guess Atlanta probably told themselves, hey man, Justin Holiday can shoot threes. That's going to be basically Kevin Huerter. It has not been that. Huerter's just featured more in Sacramento's offense, and also Sacramento's offense just has a little more of a freelance thing at times around the Sabonis handoff actions and stuff, where of course Atlanta's is a little more heavy on the pick and roll. And I do think Huerter would be more stationary in Atlanta's offense. And, you know, Atlanta's offense is a bit of a conversation in and of itself where, yeah, they're not getting enough three-pointers off. The weird thing is they'll have big point totals, but a lot of that's because their pace is really high as opposed to their offense being super efficient. As I say that, LeBron torched them for like 47 in that one game, and that was the reason they lost that one. John Collins has been getting more shot attempts recently, so that's fun because for a lot of this season, Collins has been asked to do a role that he really just shouldn't be doing. I would be surprised if Nate McMillan was the coach of this team like a year from now. For the Celtics, what do you got for me? Turnovers and poor defensive rebounding to close out the 2022 finals. You're going to make me relive this, huh? I do remember Wiggins grabbing a bunch of offensive rebounds versus them. If I can attempt to be positive for a second, they did make the finals with Jason Tatum at however old he is and Jaylen Brown however old he is, so I really don't want to look at last season as a negative, even if, of course, losing in the finals is not fun, especially when you're up 2-1 in Game 4 with like 6 minutes left to go or whatever it was. But then the neutral NBA fan in me got to appreciate Steph Curry just having some all-time stuff, so okay. But yeah, the biggest thing I remember from that series was just the Warriors, their timing defensively and their communication and where they brought help from, which I think a lot of the time was like the opposite side of wherever the drive was coming from Tatum and Jalen. Just really overwhelmed them. For the Nets, taking so long to carve out some semblance of stability. They look fantastic, man, between KD and Kyrie, not missing anything, especially KD from mid-range. The switching defense with Nick Claxton definitely being in the lead for my role player all-stars at center right now, I'll say that. But if we do a recap of this whole thing, like first season, KD is out, Kyrie eventually goes out with shoulder injury, right? Then it's the second season. They trade for James Harden midway through, and they look unstoppable until injuries happen in the postseason for him. Then last year, we get everything with Kyrie, and then Harden wants out. Along the way, we get the DeAndre Jordan, Jared Allen saga, if you will call it that. The Kenny Atkinson saying, what, my voice is no longer being heard or whatever, and then Steve Nash becomes the coach. And then, oh yeah, there was a Kevin Durant trade request. And now here we are, potentially the best team in the Eastern Conference. I mean, they have been that for the last month or so, if you will. Dealing out of number 13 in the 2022 NBA draft. Yeah, the Hornets have had a pretty unlucky season. Of course, LaMelo missed so many games early in the year that it just created a hole that at this point they probably can't climb out of, even if LaMelo has been back. And I do want to do a video about him at some point here. Mark Williams has recently gotten minutes, and the hope there is that he can be their long-term center who can be the foundation of the defense and set screens for LaMelo and all that. I don't know if any Hornets fan was excited about Steve Clifford coming back. Like, yeah, he's good fundamentally and all that, but in terms of development and imagination on offense, it is what it is. The other thing, too, specifically with that 13th pick, is that it kind of becomes a Mark Williams versus Jalen Duren situation, even if it's not fair to either guy. For Chicago, it is whiffing on the 2022 trade deadline. Sitting tight when you're 13 games over 500 with Harrison Barnes and Jeremy Grant floating around the trade market. Idea of Patrick Williams too valuable is backwards thinking. Well, I think for one, the Sabonis-Halliburton trade made it to where Harrison Barnes was not going to get traded. And as far as Jeremy Grant, I mean, based on what Grant's been doing in Portland, okay, you could have something there. I believe that I was not really on team trade Patrick Williams for Jeremy Grant. Mostly because I just wasn't sure if Jeremy Grant's scoring was going to keep up like that on a team where he was no longer the number 1 or 2 option. As far as the big picture regret for the Bulls, I mean, so they make the Vooch trade. That trade is a complete home run for the Magic and for the Bulls. Then you could also be like, well, then DeRozan doesn't show up there. He doesn't want to come there if they don't do the Vooch trade, which may or may not be true. I don't really know. Then you could also be like, well, if Lonzo never gets hurt, then this whole thing makes sense. It's kind of weird, but it's just a general malaise about Chicago right now. Acquiring Karis LeVert ahead of the 2022 deadline. Yeah, it's one of those hindsight things where it's like if you get Donovan Mitchell first, which of course I know that's impossible for this scenario, but like if in some magical world they had Mitchell first, they probably don't then trade for Karis LeVert. But still, you know, if this would be the biggest quote-unquote regret that Cleveland would have, then like I would say they're doing pretty good. For Dallas, I think we all know what this is going to be. How they handled the Jalen Brunson situation, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, technically they didn't give him the extension when they could have in 2021. They referenced that in the article. I don't have a lot to add to this. We all pretty much know what happened. I'm just going to keep saying what I say with Dallas. They're either going to make a moderately big trade this season or a huge trade down the road when they have more draft picks available to move. There's also the fact that this is kind of happening again with Christian Wood, and we'll just see. I mean, does he want to bet on himself? Because I think the most they can give him is like 4 years, $77 million during the season. So for the Nuggets, they have giving the Thunder a 2027 first-round pick to take on JaMychal Green. Yeah, they got Peyton Watson out of that trade, and he has played 15 minutes in the NBA so far. Struggles Denver has when Jokic is on the bench. Getting a rotation player who can help him out right now would have been nice. But hey, listen, if Peyton Watson ends up being a rotation player for him for a while, then cool. But for right now, okay, I see what they're saying. For the Pistons, we got a Marvin Bagley picture, giving Marvin Bagley 3 guaranteed years. And the tough thing with Bagley is he hasn't really played with Cade that much, right? Like, Cade's out for the season now, and I don't think Bagley played a single game with Cade this season. For the Warriors, that's kind of an awkward picture. Failing to replace veteran depth outside the starting 5. Well, DiVincenzo's been better lately. I've said it before, like, between either another on-ball defender or just a wing or another big. I think one move, even if it's not like a big move from the Warriors, could be all they need for the rotation to just, there isn't really that like $15 million guy who is expendable. It's either really big contracts or really small contracts. For Houston, we got Şengün. What about Şengün? Superficially restricting Alperen Şengün's role for so long. With the post moves where you've got hook shots and spin moves and drop steps and pump fakes and footwork and all that, and then you've got him looking for cutters, and he can kick out to guys, and he's looking to run handoff actions with guys like KPJ. He's the lead ball handler. Jalen Green's the leading shot taker. But sometimes I do find myself being like, what if they just ran it through Şengün a little more often? There's something there with Şengün, man. Or Indiana, I don't know if you can find a lot of regrets for the Pacers. A lack of clarity on the front line. So I would assume you would have some about, Jalen Smith and Miles Turner and that whole thing. I think it's fine. For the Clippers, we've got not thinking outside the box enough with their offensive rotations. Okay, so they're basically saying like more Terrence Mann, who can do more off the, dribble attacking, more Luke Kennard. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, so much of it really is just the health of Kawhi and PG, to the point where I think Ty Lue had a thing recently where he was like, can I just get X amount of games in a row with my actual team? For the Lakers now, we've got, forgetting once again that wings are valuable rotation assets, or the Rob Pelinka extension. They're basically the same thing. All right. I think a lot of Laker fans would go to not trading the picks for, I mean, it's the Heald Turner trade, and I already did my whole spiel of that in my recent video. Yeah, I mean, pretty much, look, the Lakers' options are do nothing and to just, I guess, have as much cap space as possible in the offseason, use some combo of the picks to get guys who might take up some of your cap space next year, but could allow you to, like, then use, like, your full mid-level, which you can still get a good player there. And as always, you don't want to screw your future for a marginal improvement right now. For the Grizzlies, we have opting against front court diversification. I don't even know what this means. Okay, they're basically saying, like, you know, the fact that Kyle Anderson isn't here anymore, or somebody like a Kuzma or Bogdanovich, because they do have assets to move. They acknowledge that Memphis is pretty all right, so yeah. For Miami, we have a picture of PJ Tucker replacing the PJ Tucker minutes. Yeah, I mean, if you were to look at PJ Tucker's stat line in Philly, you'd be like, wait a minute, what? Well, Spoelstra didn't just have him sit in the corner, you know. PJ was involved in handoff actions and screens, and he was encouraged to just have the ball more in general, on top of what he was doing defensively for him and just adding to the Miami culture and all that. I think a Jay Crowder move, like, it would be a move. I don't think it would be the most exciting one. I think when you start thinking more about, like, Bogdanovich, that one is a little more interesting, but Miami's tradable contracts are kind of thin because they would want to move Duncan Robinson. I don't think a lot of teams would really want him, and then you could say, well, Miami can include picks, and it's like, well, they're already going to lose one of their picks in the mid-2000s to OKC, which by itself I don't think would be the number one thing, but it's also like, is this team close enough? I mean, they need more shooting, they need more front court help, but would getting that make them a title contender? I can't get there, man. For the Bucks, we've got not doing more to beef up the half-court offense. But I guess if you wanted to, you could say, well, Joe Ingles, was he really the right choice just because of his age and injury history and all that? But, you know, it's rare that you can get someone with his size who can make plays off the dribble and shoot. Now, that's the hope for Joe Ingles at this point. I mean, so far in the 8 games he's played, he's shot well from 3 in 2 of them. And 2 of them are okay, I guess, but that one's probably going to be a process. For the Pelicans, we have starting Jackson Hayes in every game of the playoffs. Yeah, in the regular season, him playing with Valanciunas was pretty effective because if you helped off of him, then he could cut to the rim or go for offensive rebounds or whatever. But in the playoffs, it didn't really hit the same. For the Knicks, we have kind of a general answer. Taking too long to clear the runway and confounding their direction. They acknowledge the Donovan Mitchell stuff, and it was just much easier for the Jazz, or for the Cavs, to move Sexton and Markkanen than it was for the Knicks to move RJ. On top of, you know, Cleveland with now their big 4. This wasn't the same thing with the Knicks. For me, I might just go with the disconnect between the front office and Tibbs, and I think the largest example of that was the Cam Reddish stuff. For OKC, we've got a lack of shooting around SGA. Well, listen, based on the game they just had against the Celtics where they torched them for 1,000,000 points, maybe they're doing all right. When I look at, like, the final version of this OKC starting 5 with SGA, Giddey, Dort, Chet when he's back, and then I think the last spot is a little up in the air. I do think where Chet is as a shooter is going to matter quite a bit there. With Orlando, we have holding on to Terrence Ross for so long. I would say if your biggest regret is not trading Terrence Ross, then you're doing pretty well. I should probably do a video on the Magic at some point, talk about Paolo and Franz and Bol and Wendell and Fultz and Cole Anthony and the whole thing. And if we fast forward some amount of seasons, I think this team is definitely going to be players in the East. For the 76ers, we've got leaving Embiid in too long during their Game 6 win over Toronto. Yeah, that one was definitely not ideal for Philly. My biggest memory of this playoff run for them was when Joel, he's got the mask on. You can tell he's just clearly beat up. And then inside the NBA blamed it on him not playing hard enough because he didn't win the MVP award. And I'm like, guys, I'm not even sure his eyeball works right now. Phoenix, not taking a bigger swing on the trade market. Yeah, man, I mean, look, my son's video this year is titled that they have to make a trade. Last year it was they should make a trade or might have to make a trade or whatever it was. I've been beating that drum for a minute, not that I'm the only one. They've got all their picks. They've got Crowder's contract. They've got Shamit's deal, even if it is a little lengthy, but it's cheap every year. Shamit's had a couple of big games for him recently. We'll see. Although you could just say the Game 7 against Dallas. For the Blazers, we have turning over the roster without getting back an extra 2022 first rounder. Okay, so basically they should have gotten another pick out of the whole thing. I do remember the temperature around the CJ move to be a little like, ooh, could they have gotten more? But Josh Hart has been a good rotation piece for him and all that, as he averages 8 rebounds and 4 assists per game. For Sacramento, we have unresolved depth at backup center. Of course, I was extremely mean to the Kings when they traded for Sabonis and they moved Halliburton and all that. And the Kings are having a good time. The objective was to have a good time. They might have the loudest arena in the league, and watching them at like 11:30 on League Pass is something I look forward to pretty regularly right now. As for the backup center thing, they'll be okay. San Antonio not bringing in a veteran floor general after the DeJounte Murray trade. What, Trey Jones doesn't do it for you? Yeah, he's got to work on his 3-ball, but I feel like Trey Jones fits into the player they're describing. Trey Jones, 241 assists, 71 turnovers. For the Raptors, we've got prioritizing Project 6'9" over roster balance and actual needs. Yeah, the Raptors are weird. You know, the half-court offense just doesn't have enough happening, even if Siakam's growth as a shot creator is there. Precious Achiuwa just finally came back recently after missing a lot of time with an ankle injury. You've got Fred, whose 3-ball has not been as good this season, and Fred's efficiency has never really been as good as you wanted it to be, mostly because his inside scoring was never, dominant, we can say. Nick Nurse had some not encouraging quotes after the Grizzlies' loss recently, where he basically just said they didn't play hard enough. With all this said, look, I mentioned Siakam's growth. Scotty Barnes as a post scorer and an inside scorer in general is still really promising. Does Utah have any regrets about the way things have gone? Oh, their uninspiring loss against Dallas. Oh, I mean, okay, yeah. If you want to go with the loss that led to the end of the Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert era, then yeah, okay, that could be a regret. I want to mention Walker Kessler for the second time this season. Dude's good. I think he's going to be one of the best rim protectors in the league. And for the Wizards, we've got forfeiting all leverage in the Bradley Beal contract. Yeah, it's nothing against Bradley Beal, but I think when you just look at their whole thing now, I think trading him and just going in a different direction with this assets, picks, and all that, probably more exciting. But now he's got the no trade clause and the huge contract. But they didn't, and now they're in a spot where you've got Porzingis and Kuzma just on short contracts. I think trading Kuzma is the next move. They've been winning recently, so I don't know. Maybe they want to keep on trying to hang on to a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference if they can get there. But